Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. Children invent imaginary friends all the time. Psychologists say it's a sign of creativity, of social development, a way to process the world. But sometimes, those friends don't feel imagined at all. It started with tea parties. My daughter, Elsie, was 4 when she first introduced me to Mr. Long. She'd pour an extra cup for him, leave a chair open across from her, and tell me not to sit there. "He doesn't like people in his space," she'd whisper. First, I humored her. I asked if Mr. Long had a family, what he looked like, where he lived. Her answers were vague but consistent. "He lives in the cold part of the house. He doesn't like light. He watches when you sleep, but not in a bad way." That last part chilled me a little, but again, she was 4. Children say strange things, and our old house did have colder pockets. Drafty corners, uneven insulation. But then the stories changed. She stopped referring to Mr. Long as a friend. "He says you're lying again," she told me one morning over cereal. "Lying about what?" I asked, trying to play along. She just stared at me with those pale blue eyes, spoon midair. "You know." I didn't, or maybe I did. There was something about the way she said it, flat, unblinking, that made the back of my neck tingle. I didn't tell my husband. There was nothing really to tell. But over the next few weeks, Elsie's connection to Mr. Long intensified. She started waking up at night, not screaming or crying, just sitting up and whispering to the dark, sometimes laughing. One night, I cracked the door open and found her in the middle of the floor, facing the corner. "He says you had a baby before me," she said. My chest went cold, because that wasn't possible for her to know. I'd had a miscarriage before Elsie was born. We never told anyone, not even family. It was early, private, painful, the kind of thing you bury. I tried to remain calm. "Who told you that?" She turned her head toward me, slowly. "Mr. Long. He says you left the baby in the dark." Couldn't breathe. The next day, I asked her preschool teacher if anyone had spoken about pregnancy or loss in class. She shook her head. No books, no movies, nothing. This knowledge, it didn't come from a child's imagination. Later that night, I tried to ask Elsie about it. "Where does Mr. Long come from?" I said gently. She shrugged. "He's always been here. He was waiting." "For what?" "For you to tell the truth." I didn't sleep that night. I kept walking past her room, watching the baby monitor. It fuzzed out around 3 a.m. When it returned, her bed was empty, but she was still asleep in it. That didn't make sense. The next morning, I noticed something scratched into the wood under her bed. A name. Samuel. The name we had picked for the baby we lost. We never told anyone. Something was wrong. I confronted my husband, asked if he'd mentioned it by mistake in sleep on the phone. Anything. He swore he hadn't. He was starting to worry too. We agreed. If it happened again, we'd take her to a child psychologist. But we never got that far. 3 days later, Elsie went missing. It was a calm afternoon. I was cleaning the kitchen. She was in the living room watching cartoons. I stepped out to check the laundry, 3 minutes at most. When I returned, she was gone. Every door was locked. Every window closed. No sign of forced entry. Just the quiet hum of the television and the faint smell of something sweet and rotten. Police searched the neighborhood. Drones, dogs, volunteers. Nothing. But in her room, under her pillow, was a note written in crayon. Just one line. She told the truth too late. For weeks I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching the baby monitor, even though there was no baby. Sometimes at night the screen still fuzzed out, and in those moments of static, I'd see him. Long arms, slender body, standing in the far corner. No eyes, no face, just a silhouette. Watching. I wasn't sure if it was a breakdown or a haunting. But then, 2 weeks after Elsie disappeared, I woke up to find a small handprint on the inside of the hallway mirror, too high for a child to reach, and carved into the glass beside it the word, cold. She had always said he lived in the cold parts of the house. I moved. I left everything behind. But some things don't stay buried. The silence followed me. The mirror fogs at night even when it's warm. Sometimes I hear tiny footsteps across the floor, followed by a whisper too faint to catch, except for one word, always the same. Liar. I don't know if Mr. Long was imaginary, a ghost, or something older, something that feeds off silence and secrets. But I've learned one thing. Children don't invent their fears. They inherit them. They bought the baby monitor for peace of mind. A digital model with high-definition audio, motion sensitivity, and a two-way speaker. Everything a first-time parent could want. It was marketed as secure, encrypted frequencies, no chance of outside interference. But peace of mind, like sleep, became a fading luxury in that house. Their daughter, Lila, was 7 months old when the voice first came through. It wasn't a scream or a cry. Not the usual static glitch either. Just a voice. Low, calm, male. Are you awake, little one? Lila stirred in her crib but didn't cry. The monitor flickered softly, picking up her coos. They froze. At first, they thought it was the radio. Maybe interference. But the device had no radio. No Wi-Fi issues. No signal bleed. It was closed circuit. Fully encrypted. Still, they searched. The windows were locked. Doors untouched. The nursery, empty. Yet when they played the recording back, the voice was there, clear, intentional, unshaken. Don't worry. I'm here now. From that night on, the monitor became something they feared to check. Some nights the voice returned, whispering lullabies in a language they couldn't place. Other nights it simply breathed slow, rhythmic exhales that didn't match Lila's. It never spoke when they were in the room, only when she was alone, and Lila began to change. Her sleep schedule unraveled. She'd stare into the corners of her crib, eyes wide and alert, but not frightened, as if listening, as if waiting. She'd smile at nothing, laugh when silence stretched. Once, they caught her reaching up toward the air above her, fingers grasping as if trying to hold someone's hand. They stopped using the monitor, unplugged it, removed batteries, locked it away in a drawer. That night, the voice came through the walls. No electronics, no speakers, just the nursery and a sound they couldn't explain. She's listening now. The wallpaper peeled slightly in the corners of the room, revealing older layers beneath. Strange symbols had been drawn between coats of paint, scratched into the plaster with something sharp. Marks that weren't in any known language. Spirals and fractured faces. They hadn't seen them during the house tour, hadn't noticed them while painting, but now they were visible, like something wanted to be found. They moved the crib into their room, but Lila wouldn't sleep, not peacefully. She cried until her voice gave out, eyes always drifting toward the bedroom door, as if something waited just outside. They tested the monitor again out of desperation. New batteries. Factory reset. The moment it powered on, the screen filled with static. And then, a whisper. You moved her. That wasn't very kind. The voice was no longer calm. It was disappointed, patient but fraying. Something beneath the surface hinted at resentment. Not anger, but betrayal. And then Lila began to speak. Too early. Too clear. Her first word wasn't mama or dada. It was him. Not just once. Over and over. She'd point to the corners of the room. To the monitor. To the dark hall. Him. 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 The pediatrician dismissed it as a coincidence. A fixation with sound. But no one could explain why she started sleepwalking at only 10 months old. They found her standing at the foot of the stairs one night, silent and still, her hand clutching the monitor like a toy. The voice crackled from it again, this time quieter. We're almost ready. The nursery door slammed that night. No windows open. No draft. Just force. Sudden and cruel. The mobile above the empty crib spun wildly, as if someone had pushed it. They hired professionals. Paranormal investigators, spiritual advisors. All inconclusive. One left without refunding their fee, saying only, "There's something patient here. Something that's always known it would be invited." They reviewed old photos of the house, looked up its history. Nothing notable. No tragic deaths. No folklore. Just a home built in the early 60s. One previous owner, an elderly man named Alan Thorne. They found an old newspaper clipping from the year before they moved in. Thorne was a reclusive audio engineer, designed surveillance tech in the 70s. Rumors claimed he was obsessed with sound frequencies that could connect minds. His last invention was a two-way infant monitoring system. He died in the nursery of a sudden aneurysm. Alone. The prototype was never recovered. When they opened the monitor casing, they found something unusual inside. Not the standard factory board. It had been modified, etched with initials, AT, and wires that didn't match the brand's model. Something had been added, or perhaps never removed. They threw the monitor out the next morning, buried it in the woods miles from home, dug deep, salted the earth, said nothing. But that night, Lila stood up in her crib again, pointed to the window, and whispered, "He found it." Children draw what they feel. They sketch the world as they see it. Honest, unfiltered, and sometimes alarmingly accurate. He was 5, not old enough to understand mortality, not really. But the drawing he handed his mother that morning didn't come from imagination. It came from something else, something he couldn't name. Crayon lines scratched over cheap printer paper, messy and bright, but unmistakable. A stick figure version of her, lying in a red pool, excess over her eyes. A small car drawn at an odd angle. Trees, a long stretch of road. And in the corner, her son had written Mommy with a backwards Y. She laughed nervously, brushing it off the way parents do. Maybe he saw something on TV. Maybe he was just experimenting with shapes, like kids do. But when she asked why Mommy was sleeping in the picture, he replied without blinking. "Because you die after I get on the bus." That night, she didn't sleep. She chalked it up to anxiety, but something about the picture wouldn't leave her. The blood, the crooked car, it was too detailed, too specific. And her son wasn't the kind to draw like that. Most of his pictures were dinosaurs and superheroes. Never death, never her. The next morning, she was supposed to take her usual route to work after dropping him off at the bus stop. But something made her hesitate. The picture was still sitting on the kitchen table. She stared at it for a long time before finally deciding to take a different road. Just in case. Felt stupid, superstitious, but the kind of superstition that lives in every parent's gut. As she drove the alternate route, the radio was off. Every noise in the car seemed louder, the blinker ticking like a heartbeat. the wind brushing against the windows like whispers. And then, 5 minutes from the turn she was supposed to avoid, a gut-clenching sound. Sirens. A cluster of flashing red and blue lights blocked the road ahead. An accident. 2 cars, mangled. One of them the same make and color as hers. Same model, crushed against a tree. A stretch of blood across the asphalt. She pulled over. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. And in her mind, the image of her son's drawing bloomed again. Exactly the same scene. She asked herself over and over, how could he have known? Children don't predict the future, right? But this wasn't the end. Because later that night, after picking him up from school and holding him a little tighter than usual, she asked him gently, "Why did you draw that picture?" He shrugged. "I didn't draw it. He did." "He?" she asked, cold sinking into her chest. He nodded like it was nothing. "The man who stands in my closet when the lights are off. He said I should draw it or you wouldn't believe him." The house had always been quiet, peaceful even, but that night, every shadow seemed to stretch farther. Every creak in the floor lingered too long. She left the closet door open in his room, just to prove there was nothing there. But the moment the lights turned off, her son whispered, "He's back now." She didn't believe in ghosts. She didn't believe in premonitions. But something had changed. The air in the house was heavier, colder, and when she finally drifted off to sleep, the dream came. It wasn't a dream, not really. It was the exact same road, the same car crash, except this time she wasn't watching from the outside. She was in the driver's seat, glass cutting into her arms, blood pouring down her face. A shape was sitting in the passenger seat. A man, not made of flesh but of shadow, leaching color from the world around him. He leaned toward her and whispered, "You weren't supposed to listen." She woke up screaming. She didn't tell her son, didn't want to scare him, but every day after that he drew more pictures. None of them normal. One showed her on fire in the kitchen, another drowning in the bathtub. Every time she avoided the scenario, changed her routines, and every time something happened. A grease fire that started when she almost left the stove on. A loose pipe that burst behind the wall. An exposed wire under the bathtub she'd never noticed until an electrician pointed it out. Each drawing was a warning she wasn't supposed to receive. Eventually, she started asking questions. About the man in the closet, what he looked like, what he said. Her son was hesitant, scared. But one detail stood out: he had no face, just eyes. Somehow, the more she dodged fate, the darker the house became. Things moved on their own. Whispers in the vents. Her son's toys turning on at night, playing lullabies backwards. She tried to bless the house. Burn sage, pray. But nothing worked. One night, her son refused to sleep in his room. He said the man was angry. He said Mommy had ruined his game, that the drawings were meant to help him, not her, that every time she avoided what was coming, the man got closer to him instead. It all clicked at once. These weren't just warnings, they were exchanges, trades, fates shifting between mother and child. Whatever it was, it hadn't come to warn her. It had come to claim one of them. The last drawing was the most horrifying. It showed their house, her son's room, and in the window something looking out. Not her, not her son, but something tall and black, with long fingers resting on the glass. Inside the room, her son was lying on the floor, stick-figure limbs twisted, the word mine written above him in jagged red letters. She burned it, ripped it apart. But the next morning, another copy of the exact same drawing was on the table, untouched, unburned. Crayons still warm. She moved, took her son far away. New town, new house, different closets. But on the first night in their new home, she found a new picture taped to her bedroom mirror. This one wasn't drawn by a child. It was done in charcoal, rough and violent. It showed a stick figure version of her son, smiling hand in hand with something faceless. And in the corner, scrawled in a child's messy handwriting, "You can't move away from what already lives in you." It started as an ordinary evening, a quiet suburban neighborhood, a warm meal, a bedtime routine that followed like clockwork. A mother kissed her 6-year-old son goodnight and tucked him under his superhero-themed blankets. She turned on his nightlight, humming the lullaby she'd sung since infancy, the one he used to hum back to her. But that night he didn't. She closed the door softly behind her, unaware that this would be the last time she'd tuck that version of her son into bed. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the hallway motion sensor lit up. The parents assumed it was just the cat again. But when they checked the camera feed, their son's door was wide open. His bed, empty. His nightlight still glowing. The only thing out of place was the small, muddy footprint on the hallway tile, leading away from his room. The house was locked from the inside, windows sealed.
No alarms triggered. No noise.
Just absence, as if he had simply unexisted. They called the police. Search parties scoured the neighborhood. Drones flew overhead. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of a nearby forest, where it vanished. Not tapered, not misdirected, just ended like a thread cut mid-weave. Days passed. Hope eroded into grief. Friends brought food. Relatives tried to distract them. But the silence of his room was deafening. His toys untouched. His books half-read. Then, 5 days later, just after midnight, the hallway sensor lit up again. He was standing in the doorway of his bedroom, barefoot, in the same pajamas he vanished in. Silent, smiling, but not quite right. He looked like their son. Every freckle was in place. Same soft brown eyes. Same little scar on his elbow. But he was wrong, like a song played slightly off-key. At first, they tried to believe. They ran to him, tears and disbelief colliding. They called off the investigation. The media called it a miracle. But the parents knew. Deep down, they both knew. He didn't remember being gone. He had no recollection of the forest. No idea how he'd left the house. He said he'd gone to sleep and woke up to them crying. But it wasn't memory loss. It was detachment, as if the event had happened to someone else. His mannerisms changed. He no longer hummed the lullaby. He held pencils with the wrong hand. He asked questions in a strange, flat tone. Once, when his mother gave him his favorite cereal, he stared into the bowl and asked, "Why does this shape make people feel safe?" He began drawing obsessively, images of trees with mouths, of children with their eyes stitched shut, of clocks with too many hands always pointing to 2:47. At night, he'd talk in his sleep, gibberish at first, but one phrase kept returning, over and over. "The echo walks in my skin." His laughter was different, too perfect, like it had been learned, rehearsed. He became fascinated with mirrors, staring at them for long stretches without blinking. He once asked, "Do you think the other me is trapped behind the glass?" Doctors said trauma, a coping mechanism, night terrors, dissociation, but nothing explained the subtle shifts in reality that followed his return. Objects would vanish and reappear in strange places. The kitchen clock ticked backward on Wednesdays. Their dog refused to go near the boys' room, whining and scratching at the back door whenever he passed by. One night, the mother found a small notebook under his pillow. In it were pages of strange diagrams, circles overlapping with names he'd never heard before, words that didn't belong to any language. And at the center of every drawing, an eye with no iris. Just black. She asked him about it. He looked up and said, "That's not mine. He draws those when I sleep." Eventually, they tried to resume life. School, playdates, but other parents noticed. Teachers mentioned his odd stillness. One said she saw him standing perfectly still on the playground, staring at the sky for 10 minutes straight without blinking once. And then the drawing stopped. So did the questions. He became efficient, too adult, too precise. His voice lost its inflection. He began referring to himself in the third person. Not "I'm hungry," but "the boy requires food." Then one evening, his mother was folding laundry when he approached her. Calmly, without emotion, he said, "Thank you for keeping this vessel warm, but I have to go back now." Before she could react, he collapsed. He was unconscious for 12 hours. Doctors found nothing wrong. But when he awoke, he wept uncontrollably, clung to her, begged to never be left alone again. It was him, the real him. He remembered everything, not all at once, not clearly, but fragments, shapes moving in trees, place with no sky, a whisper that crawled inside him, a voice that kept saying, "We're the skin, learn their love." Whatever had taken him hadn't just borrowed his face. It had studied them, mimicked their habits, wore their grief like a costume. And when it left, it didn't go far. Because after that night, the hallway sensor still lights up at 2:47 a.m., even when he's fast asleep. They said it was a settling issue. Old houses creak. Doors swell, locks shift. That's what the contractor told them when the nursery door began locking itself from the inside. But it wasn't age. It wasn't weather, because the door only locked at night, only when the baby was inside, and only when they had just walked away. The first time it happened, it was easy to brush off. Faulty latch, maybe, a draft. But the second night, when it took nearly 20 minutes to get the door open, something about the silence inside felt heavier. Their daughter had been quiet the entire time, not asleep, not crying, just staring at the far wall when they finally entered. Wide awake, eyes glassy, almost expectant. She blinked once and reached up, as if she'd known they were coming. They changed the lock the next day. For 2 weeks, everything was fine. Then, one night, just after midnight, the handle wouldn't turn. Again, no sound from inside. Not a thud, not a whimper, just that same unnatural stillness. They jimmied the door open with a screwdriver, hearts racing, and found her standing in the crib, giggling at something in the corner. Something invisible. Her tiny hand pointed at empty space, and she whispered a word she hadn't learned yet. Home. That night marked the shift. They began noticing patterns. The mobile would spin on its own, but only when the room was cold. Toys rearranged themselves while the door was shut. Sometimes they'd return to find blocks stacked in symbols, loops, spirals, configurations no toddler should know. But it was the door that kept drawing their attention. Always locked. Always from the inside, and no matter how they removed, replaced, or even left the lock entirely off, the door would click shut on its own, and no tool would open it until minutes passed. Paranoia crept in, slow and quiet. They installed a baby monitor with night vision. They didn't tell each other what they saw on it the first night, because neither wanted to be the first to say it out loud. That the shadows didn't move naturally. That once or twice something crossed in front of the camera with a shape far too tall. One night, while reviewing footage, they noticed something deeply wrong. At exactly 3:17 a.m., every night for a week, the crib began to shake ever so slightly. Not violently, not alarmingly, just a rhythmic tremor, enough to wake the child, who would sit upright and stare at the door. Never cried, never called out, just stared, waiting, as if she expected someone, or something. Sleep-deprived, the father decided to stay in the nursery one night, sitting in the rocking chair with the monitor's feed recording in another room. He left the door slightly open. The baby slept soundly. Hours passed. Then, at exactly 3:17, he felt the air thicken. No sound, no breeze, just pressure like being submerged underwater. The crib creaked. The child stirred. And he swears, to this day, he saw a handprint press into the center of the crib mattress. No figure, no arm, just the weight of something unseen. The door behind him slammed shut and locked. No key, no phone, just him, the baby, and the growing realization that they weren't alone in that room. Outside, the mother watched the monitor glitch. Static, distorted audio, then a voice. Not her husband's, not her daughter's. Hoarse, low, whispering something unintelligible between cracks of static. When the image returned, the room was empty. At least, it looked empty. The baby in the crib, the rocking chair moving slowly. But her husband wasn't visible at all. She heard banging, muffled yelling. But in the monitor, nothing. Just a quiet, rocking chair. By the time she burst through the door, the room was still. He was crouched in the corner, gasping for breath, drenched in sweat. He said it felt like hours had passed. Said something touched the back of his neck. Said it whispered to him. But when he turned around, there was nothing. They moved out the next day. Didn't sell. Didn't explain. Just left. A month later, they returned for a few final boxes. Curiosity pulled them back toward the nursery. The door was open, the crib gone, but on the inside of the doorframe, etched lightly into the wood, were tiny scratch marks, like fingernails dragged downward. 6 sets, all the same length, all exactly at child height. The contractor who walked through the house to inspect it later refused to go into that room. He said the air was wrong, claimed he heard a baby laughing from behind the walls. And when he left, he quietly mentioned to the real estate agent that the layout felt off. The blueprints later revealed something that sent chills down the couple's spine. The nursery had been added on decades ago, constructed over what was once a sealed root cellar. A root cellar with no stairs, just a square space, buried beneath the foundation, and a heavy iron door at its center. When it was finally opened, there was nothing inside. No markings, no bones, just a single item resting in the middle of the concrete floor. A key. It started with a sound, not a bang, not a crash, but a soft, rhythmic whimpering. Every night at 2:14 a.m., her crying would begin, always at the exact same time, always the same tone, low, breathy, like she was trying not to wake something up. At first, it made sense. She was 2, just old enough to start waking from nightmares she couldn't describe. We thought it was teething, or maybe a growth spurt. She couldn't explain it herself, and when we asked her what was wrong, she'd only say, "Eyes," over and over again. Eyes. We thought she meant monsters. Maybe she'd seen something on TV. Maybe her imagination was blossoming faster than we expected. But each night it got worse. Her cries turned to screams. Her sheets were soaked with sweat. She'd claw at the corner of her crib as if trying to escape. When we turned on the lights, she would point to the far corner of the room and whisper, "It watches." She never said he or she, only it. Children are usually vague with fear, but she was specific. It wasn't the closet. It wasn't under the bed. It was always the ceiling corner diagonal from the crib. a shadowed patch where the night light barely reached. We checked for mold, drafts, insects, cameras, anything to explain what might be disturbing her. But that corner was always empty, just plaster and stillness. And yet, even in the daylight, she refused to look at it. When carried near it, she'd cover her eyes. When asked why, she'd say, "Because it wants me to see it." And then came the drawings. Toddlers scribble nonsense, but hers were deliberate. Every one of them featured a black figure. Faceless, neck stretched unnaturally, limbs too thin. In each picture, the figure hovered above a small crib. Above her crib, some had red scribbles around the eyes. One had the word "no" written over and over, like she'd been trying to keep it away through sheer repetition. We stopped letting her sleep alone. We moved her crib into our room. The crying stopped. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. Peaceful, silent. But in the morning, we noticed something odd. Her baby monitor, the one still mounted on the wall of her empty room, had been turned to face that same corner, the exact same spot she'd always feared, as if someone or something had wanted to be seen. I checked the footage. It was blank, not corrupted, not missing, just pitch black, but only between 2:13 and 2:30 a.m. The rest of the night was recorded normally.
No audio. No static.
Just absolute black. Every night. The same time. Like a curtain pulled over reality. That's when we decided to move. New walls. New city. Start over. We toured a few houses. Found a modest place 2 towns over. Good neighborhood. No history. Clean inspection. Felt safe. Until the first night. At exactly 2:14 a.m., she cried again. Not screamed. Just the same low, breathy whimper. I rushed in, heart pounding, already knowing. She was pointing again. This time at a different corner. A new ceiling. A new home. But the same empty air. The same presence. She wouldn't speak the next morning. Just stared at her cereal, wide-eyed and distant. She hadn't drawn anything in days. But now she asked for crayons. What she made chilled me more than anything she'd ever drawn. It was our new house. From the outside. With one difference. In the upper window, her window was that same black figure. Staring out. Watching. Still faceless. Still wrong. Only now its head was tilted. Like it was curious. The next few nights, we installed a motion camera. Not in her room, but outside the house, pointed at that same window. Night 1, nothing. Night 2, nothing. Night 3, at 2:16 a.m., the feed froze for exactly 11 seconds. When it resumed, her bedroom light was on. We rushed in, but she was sleeping, peacefully, yet not quite. Her lips were moving, whispering, barely audible. We leaned in. Her voice was cold, mechanical, not like her own. It says it came with us. We left the house that night. Hotels, rentals, different places. But it followed. Not just in her drawings. In her words. In the way she began to change. Her laughter dulled. Her eyes dimmed. She didn't respond to her name the way she used to. And she never cried at night again. Instead, she smiled. And that smile wasn't hers. She'd sit up at 2:14 a.m. every night and stare at the wall. Not the corner anymore, just the wall, like it was speaking to her, or worse, listening through her. We consulted doctors, therapists, priests. All of them said the same thing. Children process fear differently. They can project their anxieties onto imaginary figures. They said it was normal, but none of them ever looked at her the way we did. None of them saw the moment her eyes flicked to the corner when they left. Or how, one night, we caught her tracing that same black figure onto the hotel mirror, using condensation from her breath. She didn't need to see it anymore. She remembered it. That's when we realized. It never wanted her afraid. It wanted her open. And now it had been waiting, watching, not for fear but for acceptance. And once she gave it that, she stopped being our daughter. She still eats, still talks, still plays, but there's a delay in her smile, a hollow rhythm in her laughter, a pause before she blinks, like she's remembering how. We asked her where it went. She said, "Nowhere. It's always here, but it doesn't need the ceiling anymore." They say children go through phases, imaginary friends, strange fears, things they'll grow out of. But what happens when the phase doesn't pass? When it deepens, darkens, and becomes something you can't explain. It started with silence. For weeks, their son, 6 years old, vibrant, endlessly curious, began to withdraw. Not in dramatic ways, subtle. First, he stopped asking questions. Then he stopped answering them. He'd stare at the wall during breakfast, stare at the floor when spoken to, and then one night, as his mother tucked him into bed, he said it. "I'm not your real son anymore."
No tantrum. No smile.
Just a statement, flat and final. His eyes didn't blink. His hands stayed folded under the blanket, still and cold like he wasn't even alive. She laughed nervously, assuming it was a game. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" But he repeated it, slower this time, as if trying to make her understand something obvious. "I'm not your real son anymore." He left. Children say strange things. Every parent knows this. But that night, something shifted in the house. She felt it in the air, like the walls had started listening, like the house was no longer just theirs. Over the next few days, things got stranger. Her son, if she could still call him that, stopped using contractions. Instead of "I'm," he said "I am." Instead of "don't," it was "do not." It was subtle, easy to dismiss, until she realized he was no longer speaking like a child. He began asking questions he shouldn't know to ask. "Do you believe people can be replaced? Is it still your child if it has the same body but a different mind? Would you still love me if I wasn't from here?" She asked him what he meant, where he learned those things. He only said, "I remember more than I should. I remember before I was this." At school, the teachers noticed changes too. He stopped playing with other kids, refused to touch crayons or paint. During nap time, he didn't sleep. He'd sit up on his mat and just stare at the ceiling. They thought it was trauma, maybe a reaction to something at home, but they had no answers. One teacher, out of concern, asked him, "Why don't you play with the other children?" He answered, "They're temporary. I see their lines." When she pressed, he drew a picture. It wasn't childish. It wasn't scribbles. It was detailed, sickeningly precise. A figure standing in front of a mirror. But the reflection wasn't the same. One face smiled. The other face wept. Both wore his clothes. At home, his parents began waking up to sounds in the hallway. Not footsteps dragging, as if something moved slowly down the carpet. But when they checked, their son was always asleep, or at least lying still with eyes open. They tried therapy. Every professional said the same thing. He was quiet, smart, maybe too smart, but there was nothing clinically wrong. No diagnosis fit what was happening. They ran out of explanations when he asked his father one night, "Do you know where your original went?" The father asked him what he meant, and his son, without blinking, replied, "The first version of you, the one before this one." He was softer. He smiled more. "I miss him." They searched their son's room for answers. Hidden drawings, a journal, anything. Instead, they found dozens of pieces of paper hidden behind his dresser. Every page held the same phrase, written over and over. He left and I was let in. One night they confronted him, asked him directly, "Are you still our son?" He shook his head. Not sad, not angry, almost relieved.
No.
But I was made from him. I needed a vessel. His mother screamed, demanded to know who he really was. He looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm what he couldn't carry. I'm what grew inside him when the lights went out." They tried everything after that. Prayers, cleansings, even spent a night in a motel just to get space. But the child followed them. Not physically, emotionally, psychologically. He was always present, even in absence. One morning they found a note on the fridge, written in a language neither of them recognized. When they showed it to a linguistics professor, the only thing she could say was that the structure looked ancient, older than Latin, older than Sumerian. The last straw came when he started calling them by their first names. No longer mom or dad, just their names, as if any illusion of the parent-child relationship had crumbled. His father said, "You're not allowed to call us that." The boy said, "You're not mine." They stopped sleeping. One would stay awake while the other tried to rest, just in case he stood over the bed again. And he did, often, never speaking, just watching, blinking too slowly, like something inside was studying how humans behaved. Then one day he changed again. He smiled, he laughed, played with his toys, hugged them and said, "I love you," felt normal. But the mother noticed something off. He called her Mom again, but his handwriting in school reverted to that strange language. He sang to himself while drawing. The lyrics made no sense, just syllables stitched together in eerie cadence. That night, he whispered to her, "He's coming back soon." She asked who, but he just smiled and said, "Your real son. You'll love him again once he finishes learning." The implication was clear. Whatever had taken hold of her child, it was temporary, a shell, a trial run, and the question they now live with every single day isn't what he is. It's where their real son has been this entire time. It started the night we brought our newborn home from the hospital. Exhausted and overwhelmed, we were relieved to finally have her safe in her crib. The nursery was quiet, too quiet. But what we didn't know then was that silence wasn't empty. Around midnight, I began to hear something faint, like a lullaby drifting through the air. At first, I thought it was in my head, maybe the stress or the soft hum of the air conditioner. But night after night, the melody grew clearer, haunting and soft, weaving through the silence like a whisper in the dark. My wife insisted it was just the house settling or a neighbor humming a tune. But I knew that lullaby. It wasn't any song we had ever played or sung. We never had a music box or any recordings in the nursery. The melody was too intricate, too old-fashioned, like a song passed down from some long-forgotten place. One night, unable to bear the eerie tune, I stayed awake, waiting to catch its source. The house was still, but the lullaby began again, floating through the hallway, coming from the baby's room. I stepped inside, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows. The crib was empty. I froze. Her crib was empty. I called out her name. No answer. The lullaby continued, soft and chilling, filling the room with a strange, sad warmth. Then, from the corner of the nursery, I saw it. A shadow moving slowly, shaped like a woman. Her outline flickered, translucent, almost like smoke. The shadow bent over the crib and whispered the lullaby in a voice that was barely more than a breath. I blinked, and she was gone. The baby was still nowhere to be found. Panic surged through me as I searched the whole house, finally finding her in her bassinet in the living room, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, perfectly still. I scooped her up, heart racing. The next day, I asked my wife if she'd noticed anything strange. She hesitated, then confessed she had heard the lullaby too, but thought it was just her imagination. We agreed to ignore it until the third night. That night, the lullaby wasn't alone. It was accompanied by soft crying, like a child crying, but not ours. It was distant, desperate, echoing through the walls. The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. We called a priest, thinking it might be something spiritual. He blessed the nursery, sprinkled holy water, and left murmuring about restless spirits. But the lullaby persisted, sometimes sung in a voice that sounded so close. It felt as though the woman was right beside us. Curiosity pushed me to research the history of the house. Years ago, a mother had lived here. Her baby died in the nursery under mysterious circumstances. Locals whispered about a lullaby she sang, a song she claimed would protect her child from the darkness. But the child never woke up. The mother's grief was said to have tethered her spirit to this world, forever singing that lullaby in a desperate attempt to bring her baby back. Suddenly, the lullaby wasn't just a haunting, it was a warning. One night, I recorded the lullaby on my phone. When I played it back, I noticed something chilling. Beneath the melody was a faint whisper repeating a single word, sleep. Not an innocent lullaby, but a command. I realized then the lullaby was meant to soothe, but also to trap. On the seventh night, the lullaby changed. It slowed, warping into a twisted version, each note dragging like a cold finger down my spine. The shadow appeared again, more defined, her eyes hollow and black, staring straight at me. She wasn't singing anymore. She was pleading. The baby's breathing became shallow. I could feel the air around us grow heavier. It was as if the shadow was trying to pull her away into a dreamless sleep from which she might never wake. I shouted for the spirit to leave, my voice trembling but firm. The shadow wavered, then vanished, leaving behind a cold silence. The lullaby stopped. For weeks, the nursery remained quiet. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faintest echo of that old song. Just a few notes floating on the wind, reminding me that some lullabies should never be played. The first time my daughter mentioned it, I almost dismissed it as one of her vivid childhood fantasies. She was only 5 after all, an age when imagination blends seamlessly with reality in the eyes of a child. But the way she said it, so matter-of-factly, sent a cold shiver down my spine. She told me, "Mommy, I have another family. They live underground." I paused, not sure if I should laugh or listen. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Like in a story?" She shook her head. "No, real. They live in tunnels under our house." I looked around our cozy suburban home, the creaky wooden floors and familiar walls. Nothing about this place suggested hidden passages or secret chambers. And yet, the earnestness in her eyes made it impossible to brush off. Over the next few days, she would tell me more. She described the underground world with alarming clarity. Dimly lit corridors carved from stone, small glowing orbs floating like fireflies, and tiny rooms furnished with furniture no bigger than her toys. She said her other family was kind but always busy, and they often asked her not to tell anyone about them. That part unsettled me most. I tried to steer her imagination elsewhere, filling her days with drawing and playdates, hoping it was just a passing phase. But one evening, after she went to bed, I heard the faintest tapping from the basement. Our basement was nothing more than a storage space, with old boxes and cobwebbed shelves. I'd never seen the need to spend time there, and it always felt unnervingly cold. That night, the tapping repeated, a rhythmic, almost deliberate sound, as if someone was trying to communicate. The next morning, I asked her casually, "Did your underground family make any noise last night?" She smiled mysteriously. "They asked me to keep the door open, so they can visit me sometimes." My heart skipped a beat. There was no door down there except the one I always kept locked. That night, unable to quell my growing anxiety, I went down to the basement. The air was damp, thick with the smell of old earth and rusted metal. I felt around the walls, searching for anything unusual. My fingers brushed against what felt like a narrow crack behind the old furnace. Curious and cautious, I pushed at the panel. To my surprise, it shifted slightly, revealing a narrow, dark gap, just wide enough for a small child to slip through. I felt an icy dread wash over me. Had this always been there? Was it a forgotten service tunnel or something else? And if my daughter's tales were true, what lay beyond? That night, I asked her if she wanted to show me the way to her other family. Her eyes sparkled with excitement and hesitation. She nodded slowly. We went down to the basement together. Holding her tiny hand, I guided her to the panel. With a little effort, she squeezed through the opening and disappeared from sight. I followed, crawling into the narrow tunnel. The air grew colder, heavier. The walls around us seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Dim lights hovered ahead, casting eerie shadows. We reached a small cavern where several children sat around a glowing stone table. Their faces were pale, their eyes reflecting an unnatural light. One of them, a girl about my daughter's age, smiled warmly and said, "We've been waiting for you." My daughter introduced me as Mom and explained I was here to visit. The children nodded but seemed wary of me. As we talked, I noticed the other children spoke in strange, echoing voices, almost like whispers layered over each other. They told me they lived there to protect their world from something terrible above, something that came at night and hunted them. My daughter's other family was trapped underground by fear, bound to the tunnels by something unseen, something dark that no one dared confront. I tried to ask more, but the cavern trembled suddenly, the glowing stones flickering as a cold wind swept through. The children looked frightened and urged us to leave before it came. We hurried back through the tunnel, the walls seeming to close in behind us. When we emerged into the basement, the panel slid shut as if sealed by an unseen force. For days after, my daughter seemed distant, whispering to herself and staring at the basement door. One night, I heard her voice calling from the dark hallways, whispering, "They're waiting. They want me to come back." I wanted to protect her, to keep her safe above ground, but the line between the worlds was blurring. Then, one morning, I woke to find her bed empty, except for a small, glowing stone on her pillow, the same soft light I saw underground. I searched the house frantically, every nook and cranny, but she was gone. All that remained was a faint echo of laughter, drifting up from the basement below, and the unmistakable feeling that beneath our home, that other family still waits. It wasn't the kind of thing you expect to inherit. When my wife's grandmother passed, the estate was mostly empty except for some old furniture and dusty heirlooms tucked away in the attic of the house she left behind. Among those relics was an antique crib, carved from dark wood, with delicate yet worn details that spoke of a different era. It was beautiful in a way that felt both precious and ancient. We brought the crib home for our baby, Emma. She was only a few months old when we moved into the house, and the crib quickly became her favorite place to sleep. There was something about the crib's presence, something that made the house feel more like a home, as if it carried the warmth of generations before us. But it wasn't long before that warmth began to chill. At first, it was subtle. The crib would creak softly during the night, just as if it were settling or shifting in the quiet. I told myself it was nothing, an old piece of wood reacting to temperature and humidity. But then Emma started waking up more often, not crying or fussing, just wide-eyed, staring into the shadows of her room. One night, I woke to the faint sound of rocking. I thought it was the wind, but the crib was moving, gently swaying back and forth all on its own. I approached quietly, expecting to find a loose floorboard or some mechanical cause. But the crib was empty. Emma was asleep in her bassinet in our room, sound asleep. That night, the air felt heavy, thick with something unspoken. My wife and I exchanged uneasy glances. She insisted it was the house settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching us, tethered to the crib. Then came the dreams. I dreamed of a baby, pale and quiet, with eyes that held an ocean of sadness. She was lying in that same crib, but the room was different, darker, colder. She reached out with tiny hands, but whenever I tried to touch her, my fingers passed through her like mist. I could hear a faint lullaby, sung in a voice that was both distant and hauntingly familiar. One morning, I woke to find the crib's mattress slightly shifted, as if someone had sat up or moved around in the night. Emma was calm, but the air in the room was colder than before. My wife refused to speak about it, but I noticed the way her eyes darted nervously whenever we passed the crib. One evening, while I was alone, I heard a soft whisper. It was so faint I could barely make out the words, but it chilled me to the bone. "Don't forget me." The next day, I found an old photograph tucked inside the crib's drawer. It was black and white, worn and faded. A woman held a baby that looked eerily like Emma, though the photo was dated over 70 years ago. The baby's eyes seemed to follow me, full of longing and sorrow. We began researching the history of the crib and the house. It belonged to a child who had died decades earlier, a baby named Clara who never left the nursery. The more we learned, the heavier the atmosphere became. It was as if the crib was a vessel, holding the memories, the grief, the unfinished story of that lost child. Emma, oblivious to all this, continued to sleep peacefully, except for those nights when she would suddenly wake, staring toward the crib's corner, whispering, "Clara." One night, the rocking was more violent. The crib shook as if something was trying desperately to get out or in. I rushed to Emma's room, heart pounding, only to find the crib empty again. Emma was crying softly, pointing toward the corner where shadows seemed to twist unnaturally. I reached for the old photograph once more, and as I held it, I felt a chill run through my body. The sorrow in those eyes wasn't just sadness. It was a plea to be remembered, to be seen, to be acknowledged. We covered the crib with a sheet and moved it to the attic. The rocking stopped, the whispers faded. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the shadows grow long, I still hear the softest creak of that crib, as if it's still waiting. Our baby, Emma, was always quiet, not the sweet, cooing kind of quiet that new parents celebrate, but the kind that makes your skin crawl. From the moment she could focus her eyes, she never looked at us, never smiled, never reached out. Instead, she stared endlessly at the ceiling above her crib, as if something invisible was perched just out of sight. At first, we thought it was just a phase or maybe a trick of her developing vision. But days stretched into weeks, and that same, unwavering gaze continued. No matter what we did, no matter how many toys or mobiles we dangled, Emma's eyes stayed locked on the blank expanse above. The pediatrician said babies sometimes fixate on patterns or lights. The ceiling was plain white. No lights, no fans, nothing that could capture her attention so persistently. She'd grown pale, restless during the day, and haunted at night by a quietness that swallowed our home. One night, when the house had settled into an eerie stillness, my wife and I stood beside Emma's crib, watching her wide, unblinking eyes. She didn't blink, not once. Her tiny fingers curled and twitched as if reaching for something we could not see. Then, slowly, deliberately, her gaze shifted a fraction to the corner of the ceiling near the far wall. I followed her eyes and noticed, for the first time, a faint shadow, almost like the edge of a door, but blurred and distorted, as if the ceiling was concealing something just beyond our reach. The next day, I climbed a ladder into the attic to check for leaks. The attic was a dusty, forgotten space filled with old boxes and years of neglect. But as I scanned the floor, something caught my eye. A small, square panel in the ceiling of the nursery, almost invisible beneath peeling paint and cracked plaster. It was a hidden door, the kind you expect in old houses but never find. The panel had no handle, only a faint outline and the slightest gap where fingers might pry it open. That night, Emma's stare was more intense than ever. Her gaze no longer drifted lazily. It burned with something deeper, an insistence, a silent plea. Couldn't ignore it. My wife and I exchanged worried glances, a silent understanding passing between us. Whatever was behind that panel, it had a connection to Emma's silent terror. We found a small crowbar in the basement and, with trembling hands, pried open the attic panel. A rush of cold air greeted us, sharp, musty, like the breath of something long trapped. The opening revealed a narrow, dark crawlspace, just large enough for a small child or a restless spirit. As we peered inside, I felt a shiver that wasn't just from the cold. The crawlspace was empty, save for an old, broken doll resting in the corner. Its cracked porcelain face was frozen in a smile too wide for comfort, and its eyes seemed to glisten with something almost alive. I reached in and grabbed the doll, but as soon as I touched it, a distant whisper echoed through the nursery, a soft, childlike voice saying, "Come play with me." Emma's gaze broke from the ceiling and locked onto the doll. For the first time since birth, she smiled. Not the innocent smile you'd expect from a baby, but a slow, unnatural grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, strange things began to happen. The house creaked and groaned, but not like usual old house noises. These creaks sounded deliberate, like footsteps pacing just beyond the walls. At times, the baby monitor crackled with static, and through the noise, we heard faint giggles, too high-pitched and eerie for our ears. Emma started waking in the middle of the night, crying, not with the usual hunger or discomfort, but with a frightened urgency. Her tiny hands reached toward the ceiling, and she babbled words we couldn't understand. One evening, while putting Emma to bed, I noticed the doll was missing from its spot. Panic rose in my chest. We searched the attic crawlspace, the nursery, even the whole house. Nothing. The next day, my wife found the doll sitting on the top shelf of the closet, an impossible place for a baby to reach. When she brought it down, the room grew cold, and the light flickered violently. That night, Emma's stare returned with new intensity. She was no longer fixated on the ceiling, but on the corner where the attic panel was. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against the crib bars, almost like a code. We began to notice other odd things. Objects moved on their own. Doors we'd locked at night were open in the morning. Whispers echoed softly in empty rooms, and Emma's presence seemed to deepen the darkness, pulling shadows into sharper relief. We spoke to a neighbor who had lived in the house before us. She hesitated but finally admitted the attic had been sealed off after a tragedy years ago. A child had disappeared, never found. The old panel had been covered up, hidden to bury the past. The weight of that secret pressed down on us. Could Emma be sensing something we couldn't? Or worse, was something sensing her? One night, I stayed up watching Emma. As the clock struck midnight, a faint tapping began on the attic panel. Soft, deliberate, like someone calling from the other side. I called my wife, and together we pressed our ears against the cold wood. A whisper floated through the cracks. Words we barely caught. "Help me? Don't leave me here." Emma's eyes locked onto the panel, shining with an unnatural light. Her small voice joined the whisper in a haunting harmony. "Come find me." The next morning, exhausted and terrified, we resolved to open the attic fully. We climbed the ladder and pulled aside the panel to reveal a dark passage that stretched back further than we expected. Inside, we found remnants of a forgotten life. A child's worn shoes, scraps of torn fabric, and scrawled messages etched into the dusty walls. I'm here. Please, don't forget me. The air grew thick with sadness and desperation. Emma reached out, crawling toward the darkness, as if drawn by a force older than time itself. We pulled her back, hearts pounding, but something had changed. Emma's eyes no longer reflected innocence but a shadow of something else, something lost in the attic's depths. From that day on, the ceiling no longer held her gaze, but the attic door remained a silent threat, a reminder that some horrors linger just out of sight, waiting patiently to be found. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I didn't want to admit it. It was subtle, almost too strange to believe. My daughter, Emma, had a collection of dolls, dozens of them, all lined up on shelves and in her toy chest. They were innocent enough, porcelain faces, glassy eyes staring blankly into space. But the night I saw them all turned, facing her bed, I froze. It was around 2 a.m. I'd gotten up to check on her after hearing the usual little noises that come from a child's room at night. The house was silent except for the creaking of the old floorboards beneath my feet. When I opened her door, I expected to find her asleep, maybe clutching her favorite bear. Instead, the dolls were all there, but they weren't arranged how I remembered. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Every doll, no matter where I'd left them the night before, was turned to face her bed. It was impossible. I was sure I had left them scattered. My heart beat faster. I bent down, touched one doll's shoulder, and it felt unnervingly cold. Not like cold porcelain, but like ice that had just been touched by a breath of winter wind. I whispered, "Emma, are you awake?" She didn't respond. The dolls seemed to lean slightly forward, as if they were watching, waiting. I left the room quickly, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I'd rearranged them when putting her to bed and forgot. But when I went back the next morning, they were again all turned, facing her bed. I told my husband, Mark. He laughed it off, saying Emma must have moved them during the night. But Emma was a heavy sleeper and not the kind of kid to sneak around at 2 a.m. And she certainly didn't have the dexterity to move dozens of dolls without waking herself up or making noise. Then the nightmares started. Emma woke screaming, clutching her sheets tightly, refusing to go back to sleep. She told us about the dolls watching, and how their eyes followed her wherever she moved. At first, we tried to comfort her, blaming bad dreams or her imagination running wild. But it got worse. One night, Mark and I decided to watch the room through the baby monitor. We sat in the living room, dimly lit, waiting. Around 2:15 a.m., the monitor's image shifted strangely, like static, but the dolls on the shelves looked different. One doll's head tilted sharply, and others seemed to lean forward, their glassy eyes catching the faint moonlight. We rubbed our eyes. The dolls slowly moved, inching closer toward Emma's bed. I swear I heard faint whispers. I wanted to turn off the monitor but couldn't look away. Mark held my hand, pale and tense. The next morning, Emma was pale, her eyes dark under tired lids. She told us, "They want me to sleep forever." I wanted to laugh it off, but deep down I felt cold dread. We tried everything, moving the dolls to another room, covering them with blankets, even giving some away. But every night, no matter where we put them, they were back, facing her bed. One evening, I sat in her room, trying to understand. I picked up a doll that had no eyes, just smooth blank sockets. Felt heavy, like it held something inside. I whispered, "Who are you?" The doll's head slowly turned toward me. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The room grew colder. Then Emma spoke from the corner, her voice barely a whisper. "They listen. They don't want me to be lonely." I looked at her, confused and scared. She continued, "They're here to keep me safe, but they don't like when I close my eyes." The dolls were protectors or prisoners. That night, I stayed by Emma's bed, holding her hand. The dolls sat still, their faces calm but eyes fixed on us. The air was thick, oppressive. I realized something terrifying. These weren't just toys. They were watching, waiting, bound to her in ways I couldn't understand. And maybe, just maybe, they were keeping something else at bay. But at what cost? From the moment she could talk, Emma's first words weren't mama or dada. Instead, she whispered a name, soft, clear, and oddly familiar. Nana, she would say over and over, as if it were a secret only she was meant to know. But here was the strange part. Emma had never met her grandmother. Her grandma, Lydia, had passed away years before Emma was born. In fact, Emma's parents hadn't even told her about her grandmother yet. It was a name that seemed to hang in the air, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. Every time they tried to ask Emma where she heard it, she would smile shyly and look away, as if afraid to say too much. At first, Emma's parents thought it was just a phase, a child's imagination running wild. But the moments kept piling up. Emma would point to empty corners of the room and say, "Nana's here." She'd talk to herself in the middle of the night, whispering stories to someone invisible. The air around her seemed to shift, thickening with a silent tension that neither parent could explain. One evening, Emma's mother found a small, old photograph tucked into the pages of a forgotten book. It was a portrait of a woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile. "Is this Nana?" Emma asked quietly, eyes locked on the picture. "Yes," her mother answered, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. "That's your grandma, Lydia." Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she already knew. Then she said something that stopped her mother's heart cold. "She told me she's lonely." From then on, Emma began to act differently. She stopped playing with her toys, preferring to sit by the window, staring out at the darkening sky as if waiting for someone to arrive. At night, her murmurs grew louder. Her parents, trying to comfort her, would ask what she was saying, but Emma refused to tell. One night, Emma's father stayed in her room, watching her sleep. The room was bathed in moonlight, and the shadows danced gently on the walls. Suddenly, Emma's eyes snapped open. She sat up and whispered, "Nana's coming." The air grew colder. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh drifted through the room. Then, from the corner, came the faintest sound, a quiet creaking, like footsteps on old wood. Emma smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked toward the corner and whispered again, "You're here." Her father felt a wave of unease wash over him. The presence was palpable, pressing down on the room like a heavy fog. Emma's lips moved in silent conversation, words lost to anyone who wasn't her. Then, without warning, she reached out her hand, as if to touch something or someone no one else could see. Days passed, and Emma's strange behavior grew more intense. She refused to eat, saying Nana was waiting for her to join. She often gazed at the attic door, which had been locked since the house was bought, whispering, "It's time." Emma's parents debated what to do. They wondered if their daughter was simply lonely or if something darker was at play. They decided to finally open the attic door, hoping to find some explanation. Inside the attic, they found old trunks filled with forgotten memories, photographs, letters, and a dusty music box. Among the letters was a diary written by Lydia, Emma's grandmother. As Emma's mother read the diary aloud, the room seemed to grow heavier. Lydia's words spoke of loneliness, sorrow, and a secret she had kept hidden. She wrote about a child she lost long ago, one she never got to meet, a child taken from her by fate. Emma's parents exchanged glances, suddenly understanding the pieces they had ignored. Their daughter wasn't just repeating a name. She was communicating with the past, reaching out to the grandmother she had never known. That night, Emma's whispers turned urgent. "Nana needs me," she said. Her voice trembled with something deeper, fear, longing, and an unspoken warning. Suddenly, the house was filled with a cold wind, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. Emma's eyes rolled back for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was not her own. "She's waiting in the dark. I have to go." Her parents rushed to her side, holding her close, but Emma resisted. The air grew thick with a presence that was both sorrowful and menacing. For hours, Emma remained locked in this silent battle, caught between this world and the next. Eventually, she calmed, but the name Nana echoed in the walls long after the night ended. Days later, Emma drew a picture of a woman standing by a window, her face calm but eyes filled with sadness. Her mother looked at the drawing and whispered, "That's Lydia." Emma smiled softly. "She's not alone anymore." They say children see things adults can't. Maybe it's their innocence, or maybe the veil between worlds is thinner for them. Whatever it is, what one father's child revealed about the man in the mirror was something no parent ever wants to hear. It began when my son, Ethan, was barely 3 years old. At first, he'd babble about Daddy in the mirror, pointing at the bathroom glass or the hallway mirror. I thought it was a harmless phase, like his imaginary friend, a common childhood fancy. But there was something different about this. Ethan's other daddy didn't just reflect his image back. He had a presence, a gaze that followed Ethan with a quiet intensity. I asked him one night, "Who is this other daddy?" Ethan looked at me with wide eyes and said in a voice colder than the room, "He lives in the mirror. He watches me when you're not there." I laughed it off at first. Kids say strange things. But then came the questions I couldn't ignore. "Does he love me like you do?" Ethan's answer sent a chill down my spine. "No, he's not like you. He's waiting for what I didn't ask, not yet." The mirrors in our house felt different after that. I found myself avoiding eye contact with my reflection. There was something off, like the image wasn't mine alone. I would catch flickers of movement just beyond my sight, shadows dancing behind me when I stood still, reflections that blinked when I didn't. One evening, I was tucking Ethan into bed. The room was dim, lit only by a soft night light. He clutched his blanket and whispered, "Other daddy is sad tonight." "Why is he sad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He's lonely. He wants to come out and play." I forced a smile. "Mirrors don't open, buddy." Ethan looked past me, towards the closed bedroom door, and said, "He can open." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a game anymore. In the days that followed, Ethan became more withdrawn. He stopped talking about his friends or the playground. Instead, he spent hours staring into any reflective surface. Mirrors, windows, even the shiny floor tiles. His eyes would fixate on something I couldn't see. Sometimes he'd smile. Sometimes he'd flinch as if startled by a sudden movement. One night, I woke to soft giggles from Ethan's room. I peeked inside and found him standing in front of his bedroom mirror, his hand pressed flat against the glass. His reflection smiled back, but there was something cruel in that smile, a sharpness that didn't belong to my son. "Who's that?" I asked softly. Ethan didn't look at me. "That's Daddy." "But which Daddy? Me or him?" He didn't answer. The next morning, I noticed something strange. Ethan's reflection in the hallway mirror didn't match his movements perfectly. His reflection hesitated before copying a blink. It was subtle but unmistakable. I tried to rationalize it, a trick of the light, a flaw in the glass. But deep down, I knew. One night, I stayed up late watching Ethan sleep. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting eerie shadows across the room. Suddenly, the mirror caught my eye. There, in the faint silvered glass, I saw a figure standing behind Ethan's bed. A man with dark eyes and a cold smile. I blinked, and the figure was gone. Heart pounding, I crept closer. Ethan was sound asleep, but the air in the room was heavy, thick with an unspoken dread. "Who are you?" I whispered. No answer. The next day, I scoured the house for anything unusual. I found an old, cracked mirror hidden in the attic, its frame carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. It wasn't ours. I had never seen it before. That night, Ethan refused to sleep in his bed. He insisted on sleeping in my room, clutching my hand tightly. "He wants to come out," Ethan said, eyes wide in the dark. "Who wants to come out?" I asked. "The other daddy." I felt a cold sweat break across my skin. From that night on, strange things happened. Doors creaked open by themselves. Reflections flickered and warped. Ethan's drawings became darker. Pictures of a man trapped behind glass, reaching out with hollow eyes. One morning, Ethan told me he'd spoken to the other daddy again. "He says he was lonely before I came," Ethan said quietly. "But now I have to help him." "Help him how?" I asked, fear tightening my throat. "He said if I don't, he'll take me away." I tried to dismiss it as nightmares, but the fear in Ethan's voice was real. The next week, my dreams were haunted. I saw the other daddy's face, a shadowed figure staring at me through the mirror, whispering words I couldn't understand. Every mirror in the house became a window to another world, one where that dark figure waited patiently. One night, Ethan disappeared. I found him standing in front of the attic mirror, his small hands pressed against the glass, eyes locked on his reflection. "Ethan, come here," I called. He turned slowly. His eyes were glazed, distant. "The other daddy wants me," he whispered. "Not without me," I said, grabbing his hand. But the mirror shimmered, rippling like water. Suddenly, the reflection of the other daddy smiled, wider this time, and the glass cracked. Ethan screamed. I pulled him away, heart hammering. The mirror shattered, shards glinting in the moonlight like jagged teeth. We never spoke about the other daddy again. But sometimes, when Ethan is alone, he stares into windows and mirrors with a look I can't read. A mix of fear and something else, a longing, maybe, because some doors, once opened, never fully close. Started as an ordinary night, a new parent's world of exhaustion, filled with the constant hum of monitors and soft lullabies. The baby cam was supposed to be a reassurance, a window into the nursery, a silent guardian watching over the smallest member of the family. But that night, the monitor betrayed them. The baby was asleep, or so they thought. The screen flickered, a brief distortion, a static burst. At first, it was easy to ignore, chalked up to bad signal or interference. But then a whisper, a voice, soft, yet chilling, barely audible over the low hum of the machine. "Mommy!" It was unmistakable. Not the usual cries or coos, but a clear, deliberate calling of her name through the baby cam. The mother froze. The sound didn't come from the nursery, not physically. She was standing right beside the monitor. The room was silent except for the white noise the baby cam emitted. Her heart hammered in her chest. Was it just her imagination? She reached for the monitor, trying to steady her shaking hands. But the voice came again, this time more urgent, almost pleading. "Mommy, help me." The father woke at the sound of her gasping. She explained what she'd heard. They searched the nursery thoroughly. The baby was asleep, peaceful, no signs of distress. No one else was home. The next night, the same thing happened. But this time, the voice was different, more urgent, more desperate. "Mommy, don't leave me." They began to wonder if something was wrong with the baby cam, or if it was some strange audio glitch. But no static interference could explain the clarity of the voice or the way it sounded just like their daughter's. As the nights wore on, the messages changed. Sometimes it was a whisper, sometimes a cry. It never came through the baby's actual room. It always seemed to come from the static itself, as if the white noise held secrets. One evening, the mother, desperate for answers, reviewed the footage from the baby cam on her phone. Her breath caught when she noticed something subtle. A shadow, flickering just beyond the crib's edge, moving with unnatural fluidity. It was gone the moment she blinked. She tried to tell herself it was a trick of the light or a shadow from the curtains. But then, in the same footage, a hand appeared, thin, pale, barely visible, reaching toward the baby. They decided to unplug the baby cam, hoping to stop the voices. But even then, when the room was dark and silent, the mother heard her name whispered from the nursery. Panic set in. One night, too exhausted to fight the growing dread, she fell asleep in the baby's room, right next to the crib. She dreamed of a voice calling her name. Not the sweet, innocent tone of her child, but a hollow, cold whisper that seeped into her bones. She woke to the faint sound of breathing, not the baby's. The next day, she found a note taped to the baby cam's base. Handwritten in shaky letters were the words, "Don't forget me." No one else had been in the house. The family started to dig into the history of their home. What they found was chilling. The house had belonged to a woman who lost her child many years before. The child had died suddenly in the nursery. The mother was said to have been haunted by her loss, whispering her child's name endlessly into the empty room. The mother of the family began to realize the voice on the baby cam was more than just interference. It was a plea from the past, an echo of grief trapped in the walls. But why was it calling her name? One night, she stayed up late, watching the baby cam feed intently. The monitor flickered again, and this time, the voice was clearer, more urgent. "Mommy, help me, please." The mother whispered back softly, unsure if anyone could hear her. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice replied in a chilling whisper, "Remember me." Suddenly, the baby cam screen shifted, revealing a faint outline of a child standing next to the crib. A translucent figure with sad eyes and trembling hands. The mother's heart twisted in fear and sorrow. This was no ghost meant to harm, but a lost soul trapped in time, reaching out through the fragile connection of technology to find peace. But there was a warning beneath the plea, a hidden message beneath the whispers. The mother noticed that every time the voice called her name, the baby would stir slightly, as if reacting to something unseen, and the baby cam static seemed to grow stronger with each message, as if something was trying to break through the barrier between worlds. They sought help from a local historian, who explained that grief can imprint itself on objects, especially those connected to children. The baby cam had somehow become a conduit, a channel for a spirit desperate for acknowledgement. But spirits trapped in pain are unpredictable. One night, the father stayed with the baby, watching the monitor closely. Suddenly, the monitor went black. A cold chill swept through the room. The father felt a presence beside him, something watching, waiting. The monitor flickered back on, and the words, "I'm here," appeared on the screen, as if typed by unseen hands. The family knew then that this was not just a haunting but a silent scream for help that crossed decades. The mother, torn between fear and compassion, decided to hold a small ceremony, an act of remembrance and release. They lit a candle in the nursery, spoke words of comfort to the lost child, and promised to remember. That night, the baby cam was silent.
No whispers. No static.
Just the peaceful breath of their sleeping child. But sometimes, late at night, the mother still feels a cold breeze brush past her, and in the quiet, she swears she hears a faint voice call out, "Thank you, Mommy." It started like any other ordinary night. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. His breathing was steady. But then, just past midnight, I heard it. A voice. Not the usual coos or babbles of a toddler learning to speak. This was something else. It wasn't in English nor any language we recognized. It was something strange, almost melodic but unsettlingly alien. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream. Maybe I'd imagined it. But when I went into his room, he was sitting up, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, whispering words we couldn't understand. Words that felt like they were crawling beneath my skin. We tried everything. We talked to him in English, we played recordings of other languages, hoping to find a match. Nothing. The strange language continued, sometimes softly in his sleep, sometimes suddenly in the middle of the day. It was like he was speaking to someone or something we couldn't see. Doctors checked his hearing, his brain activity. Everything came back normal. Pediatricians were baffled. They said maybe he was babbling nonsense. But this was different. It had rhythm, structure, intent. We even showed linguists the recordings. No one could identify it. Some said it sounded like a lost dialect. Others speculated it might be a constructed language. But the chilling part was how he reacted when we asked him to stop. He would look at us with eyes too old for a toddler, voice colder, and say something that sounded like a warning. They listen. Who was listening? And why? One night, I found him standing in the corner of his room, facing the wall, whispering rapidly. When I asked him what he was saying, he turned to me and said, "Not you. Not yet." The phrase chilled me deeper than any ghost story ever could. It implied he was communicating with someone or something beyond our understanding, and we were excluded from it. The house started feeling different. Shadows seemed longer. Noises crept in where silence had been before. His language grew stronger, more urgent, and with it, his behavior changed. He stopped playing with his toys and spent hours staring at empty corners, listening. One afternoon, I found a series of scratch marks on his crib, arranged in patterns that looked like symbols. I compared them to his strange language sounds. They matched in some way, like a code, like a map. We began recording every instance of him speaking the strange words. We noticed certain words repeated, ones that sounded like names, places, warnings. Sometimes he'd mumble, "Leave before the door closes," or "They wait beyond the walls." The most disturbing moment was when, during a family dinner, he suddenly shouted in that language, "They are here." The room fell silent. The air thickened, and even the dog whimpered and hid under the table. We thought it was a game at first, a toddler's imagination. But it didn't feel like play. Felt like a message, a summons. Late at night, I'd hear him whispering to shadows, telling them secrets, asking questions, even pleading. It was as if he was caught between two worlds. One we could see, and another lurking just beyond the veil. One night, unable to bear the silence, I tried to speak his strange words back to him, hoping to reach him. I stumbled through the unfamiliar sounds until he stopped and stared. Then, with a voice both innocent and terrifying, he said, "Don't speak their language. It stays with you." The warnings became more frequent, more desperate. We started feeling watched, like eyes followed us through the house. Sometimes I caught fleeting glimpses of dark shapes at the edge of my vision. Nothing solid, nothing real, but enough to make me question everything. We moved. We thought leaving the house would end it, but the language followed him. In the new home, it started again, in whispers and soft chants. The difference was now the walls seemed to respond. Faint echoes returned, as if the house itself remembered. One day he led me to a closet, pointing and speaking urgently. When I opened it, the air was cold, and a faint shimmer of darkness seemed to pulse inside. It felt alive. He said, "They wait behind the door." No one else could see it, just me and him. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. I searched for answers in old books, folklore, anything about children speaking unknown tongues. There were legends about changeling children or those touched by the other side, cursed to carry messages or secrets no one else could bear. Some said children are more sensitive, able to perceive what adults can't. Maybe my son was one of them, a bridge to a realm best left undisturbed. Each word he uttered seemed to pull us deeper into something ancient and forgotten, a story told in whispers and shadows. And then, one morning, he stopped speaking the strange language. Instead, he smiled, like a secret held tight behind his lips. But I knew it wasn't over. The silence felt heavier than the words, because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not what is said, but what remains unspoken. It started subtly. At first, I thought I was imagining things. You know how pregnancy makes your mind a little foggy, a little jumpy. The hormones make everything feel sharper, or maybe that's just the exhaustion twisting reality. But no matter how I tried to explain it away, the shadow kept returning. It was never there during the day. Only at night, when the house was quiet and I was alone in the darkened hall outside our bedroom. The hall was narrow, nothing remarkable, just a simple stretch of wall with a small window at the end. But every night, sometimes multiple times a night, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. A dark shape, standing tall and still, just beyond the doorway. I never saw a face, just the silhouette, an absence of light, a vague form. It was like a smear of black paint on the walls, but it had depth, as if it breathed. Sometimes I felt it watching me, waiting. The first time I noticed it, I was 7 weeks pregnant. I had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, my belly barely showing. When I returned to the bedroom, the hall was pitch black except for the faint moonlight seeping in. I paused, and that's when I saw it. The shadow standing just past the doorframe, unmoving. My heart raced, but I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. I blinked, and it was gone. The second night, I saw it again. And the third. Each time it felt closer, almost leaning forward, as if curious about me. The house was silent except for my own breathing, which sometimes caught in my throat. I tried talking to my husband about it. "I keep seeing this shadow in the hall," I told him one morning, hoping he'd say it was nothing, but he just smiled, tired, and said maybe I was overthinking things. It didn't help. As the weeks went by, the shadow became bolder. It didn't just stand still anymore. Sometimes it would appear to move slowly, just inches at a time, lingering near the stairwell or the coat closet. The oddest part? It always appeared only when I was alone. When my husband was home and awake, it vanished, like it knew I couldn't keep it a secret. One night, about halfway through my pregnancy, I woke up to the soft creak of floorboards. The house was colder than usual, a deep chill settling in my bones. I sat up, eyes fixed on the hallway, heart pounding. The shadow was there again. This time, it seemed to stretch and lengthen, creeping toward the bedroom door. I felt a cold wash over me, like the breath of something unseen, icy and thick. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped. Then the shadow shifted, not into a shape but into words. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing. "Protect her," it said. My breath caught. My unborn child. I blinked hard, and the shadow faded back into nothing. From that night on, the shadow never just watched. It whispered always the same phrase. "Protect her." I tried to understand. Protect who? The baby? Me? Or was it a warning? Sleep became impossible. Every night, I'd lie awake, waiting for the shadow's return, for the whispers that chilled me deeper than the night air ever could. My husband grew worried, noticing my pale face and restless nights. I told him about the whispers. First, he didn't believe me. Then one evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, I reached out to point toward the hallway. The shadow appeared, just as before, dark and silent. He froze, swallowing hard. "I see it too," he whispered. That changed everything. We started watching the house together, trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe a trick of the light, a draft creating shadows on the walls. But the shadow was too consistent, too purposeful. One night, the whispers changed. "Protect her," it said again. But this time the voice cracked, urgent, desperate. Then a name I didn't recognize. Evelyn. My heart stopped. Who was Evelyn? I asked my husband if he'd heard the name. He hadn't. The next day, I searched our home's history. The neighborhood library had old records. Our house had been built over 100 years ago, but the land had once belonged to a family named Reynolds. I found a small obituary for a child named Evelyn Reynolds. She had died young, over a century ago. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Could the shadow be connected to her? Was it trying to warn me? Weeks passed. The shadow's appearances grew more intense. It no longer waited in the hall. It appeared near my bedroom window, casting long dark fingers over the curtains. I heard faint, sorrowful crying. One night, my husband stayed home late, but I was alone downstairs. The shadow appeared in the hallway, its whispers now urgent and fast.
Danger.
Protect her. I felt a strange pull, a need to get out of the house. But I didn't know why. That night I dreamed. Evelyn. A small girl in a white dress, pale and hollow-eyed, standing silently in the woods behind the house. She held out a fragile hand, beckoning me. I woke in a cold sweat. When morning came, I told my husband about the dream. We decided to explore the woods near our home. There, under a gnarled old oak tree, we found a small buried box. Inside were faded photographs and a delicate locket. Evelyn's locket. It was clear now. Evelyn's spirit was tethered to the land, and something about my pregnancy stirred her unrest. The shadow wasn't malevolent. It was a guardian, warning me of a lurking presence it couldn't fight alone. That presence, we discovered through whispered neighbor stories, was an old man, long deceased, rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals in those woods, obsessed with controlling children's souls. We never saw the man, only the shadow that lingered, urging us to protect the baby. The final weeks of my pregnancy were the hardest. The shadow stayed with me, always present but no longer frightening. It was a reminder, a watchful sentinel from the past, fighting to keep my child safe from harm. When my daughter was born, the shadow vanished. The whispers ceased. But sometimes, late at night, I still catch movement in the hall. A faint silhouette, watching quietly from the darkness, waiting for when it's needed again. He was only 6 when he drew it, the drawing that would haunt our family for months, maybe years to come. Started like any other day. My son, Ethan, had just come home from school, backpack heavy with the usual homework, a few crumpled notes, and a thin pack of crayons. We were in the kitchen, my wife making dinner, me trying to focus on a work email. Ethan plopped down at the kitchen table and pulled out a sheet of paper. He began drawing quietly, something he often did when he needed to calm down or was feeling shy. At first, it was just simple scribbles, but then he started drawing shapes that slowly took form. I looked over his shoulder without meaning to, and what I saw made my stomach twist into a knot. It was our family portrait. There was Ethan, a small stick figure with bright eyes, standing next to his younger sister, Lily. My wife and I were there too, me with my messy hair, her with her familiar smile. But behind us all, slightly faded yet unmistakably clear, was another figure. A tall, thin man, standing just a little behind my wife's shoulder. His head tilted as if he was watching us. "What's that?" I asked, pointing to the figure. Ethan looked up, eyes wide, and smiled nervously. "That's Mr. Tall Man. He's our friend." My wife frowned. "You have a friend like that at school?" Ethan shook his head.
No.
"He's not at school. He's at our house. He lives here now." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I laughed it off. "Okay, buddy. I don't see him. Must be your imagination." But from that night on, things started to feel different. It began subtly, doors creaking open in the dead of night, lights flickering when no one was near, shadows caught from the corner of my eye. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to unsettle us. One evening, Lily woke up crying. She said she saw a man standing by her bed, watching her. We chalked it up to a bad dream. But then Ethan started refusing to sleep in his room. "I don't want to be alone," he said. "Mr. Tall Man doesn't like it when I'm alone." My wife and I tried to assure him there was nothing there, but the fear in his voice was real. He would often sit on our bed, eyes darting to corners where no one stood. Weeks passed, and the strange occurrences escalated. Objects moved on their own. A chair shoved back from the table, toys rearranged overnight. One night, I woke up to find the family photo on the wall turned upside down. The air was thick with cold, as if someone had exhaled right beside me. I started paying closer attention. Sometimes, when Ethan was drawing, he'd pause and stare at a blank spot on the wall, talking quietly to someone we couldn't see. One day, my wife found Ethan standing in the hallway, talking to the empty air, asking, "Why do you want to stay here? You don't belong with us." The next morning, Ethan came to the kitchen table with another drawing. This time, it was the same family portrait, but the extra figure was closer. No longer behind us, but standing right between me and my wife, arms crossed, staring straight ahead with hollow eyes. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I asked Ethan directly, "Who is that man?" He looked at me seriously. "He says he used to live here, a long time ago, before we were born." "Did you ever see him? Really see him?" I pressed. Ethan nodded. "Sometimes, when the lights go out." That night, I stayed up, watching Ethan's room from the doorway. The moonlight cast long shadows. At around 2 a.m., I saw a faint silhouette appear near the window. It was tall, thin, with a head tilted like the drawing. My heart pounded in my chest, but when I blinked, it was gone. The figure wasn't just a ghost or a trick of the light. It was something else, something that lingered in our home, tethered to Ethan in a way none of us understood. One afternoon, I dug through old neighborhood records at the library, searching for any clues. I discovered that the house we lived in had belonged to a man named Harold Blackwood, an artist who mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Neighbors said he was eccentric, rarely seen, and some whispered that he had vanished into thin air. The dates lined up eerily with the old photos of the house's previous owners. The final owner was never found, leaving the house empty for years before we moved in. The more I researched, the more the pieces fit together. Harold Blackwood was the man Ethan had drawn, the extra person, the man who seemed to linger in the shadows of our home. But why? One night, I found Ethan asleep on the living room floor. Next to him was the drawing, now with new additions. Harold's figure had a faint halo of color around it, almost like a faint glow. And just above the figure, written in small, shaky letters, were the words, "Protect, protect, What was Harold protecting? And from whom? The next morning, Ethan told us something chilling. He says he's watching out for us, that there's something bad coming, but he can't stop it alone. My wife and I exchanged glances. Was this some kind of warning? A supernatural guardian tied to the house and to our family? One night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air grew heavy, thick with tension. Ethan woke up screaming, "It's here! The bad thing is here!" We rushed to his room to find the lights flickering violently. Shadows moved like living things, wrapping around the corners and walls. The house groaned as if alive. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the darkness withdrew. Ethan looked up at us, eyes wide but calm. Harold pushed it away. Since then, the figure in Ethan's drawings has changed. Harold's image is no longer eerie. It has a softness, a protector standing between us and the unknown. But sometimes at night, when the wind howls through the trees and the shadows grow long, I wonder what Harold is really guarding us from, and whether he'll always be here, or if one day, the extra person standing behind us will step out of the shadows for good. The drawing was never just a child's innocent scribble. It was a window, a glimpse into something unseen, something tied to the very walls around us. And as Ethan's pictures keep evolving, so does the story they tell. One that reminds us that sometimes, the family we see isn't the only family we have. Some are hidden in the shadows, standing just behind us, watching. If you ever find your child drawing a family portrait with an extra face lurking behind, maybe, just maybe, you should look a little closer, because what you don't see might be watching you. She started digging the first hole on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen when I saw her small hands patting dirt aside, little feet scraping at the earth beneath the old maple tree. At first, I thought it was just a game, children and their endless fascination with dirt and secrets. But then she unearthed something, a shiny object, and carefully wrapped it in a rag. When I asked what she was doing, she looked up with that calm, steady gaze. The kind that unsettles you because it feels like it's seeing through you, into places you'd rather keep hidden. "I'm burying it," she said, "to keep it safe." I smiled nervously, thinking it was a simple childhood ritual, a secret treasure for her to keep. But over the next few weeks, the backyard turned into a graveyard of small holes, each carefully dug and meticulously covered again. The strange part was what she was burying. At first, it was nothing unusual, a few old coins, a toy she no longer played with. But then the things began to change. I found my own glasses missing, a watch that had stopped working, my husband's cufflink. All items that belonged to us, and none of which she had any reason to take outside. She never told us why. When we asked, she would only say, "They need to rest." The words were so simple, yet the tone in her voice sent a chill down my spine. One evening, I followed her out back just before dusk. She was kneeling in the dirt again, hands busy covering another small hole. I asked to see what she was burying this time, but she refused, her eyes flashing with an eerie defiance. "You wouldn't understand," she said. That night, the house felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones, the kind that doesn't come from the weather but from something else, something unseen. I lay awake, wondering what secrets my daughter was hiding beneath the soil. Days passed and more items disappeared. A faded photograph of my mother, a set of keys from my father's old car, even my daughter's own favorite doll, all buried in her growing collection of graves. What disturbed me most was the way she looked at us afterward, as if daring us to ask more questions. The backyard was no longer just a place to play. It was a map of loss, a silent testament to things stolen from our lives and hidden beneath the earth. Sometimes, I caught her whispering to the ground, words too soft to hear, but charged with meaning. Was she talking to the objects, to the earth itself, or something far older and darker? One afternoon, I decided to dig up one of the holes. The soil was loose, freshly turned, as if waiting for me. My fingers brushed against something hard. I pulled it out and gasped. It was my wedding ring, the one I thought I'd lost years ago. But something was wrong. The ring was scratched, as if it had been clawed at from the inside. I could swear I heard faint scratching noises beneath the soil as I held it. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the unease lingered. That night, I found her sitting by her bedroom window, staring out at the darkened backyard. When I asked what she was thinking, she said, "They're lonely. They want to come home." A knot twisted in my stomach. I tried to ignore the growing dread, chalking it up to the stress of parenthood. But then the nightmares began. Every night, I dreamt of hands reaching up from the earth, clawing and grasping at the surface. The things she buried were not just objects. They were memories, pieces of our lives severed and cast away, and they wanted to return. One morning, my husband came home looking pale. His watch was gone. We searched the house, turning everything upside down, but it was nowhere to be found. When we went outside, we found a new hole freshly dug near the fence line. Our daughter stood nearby, clutching the watch in her hand, her eyes wide and innocent. "It was lonely," she whispered. "It needed a place to stay." We tried to stop her, to tell her it wasn't right, but she wouldn't listen. It was as if some invisible force had taken hold of her, twisting her mind into something unrecognizable. Then the whispers started. Late at night, I heard faint voices coming from the backyard. At first, I thought it was the wind or the neighborhood kids, but the voices grew louder, clearer. They called my daughter's name, pleading, demanding. I never recognized the words, but they chilled me to the core. I begged her to stop, but her hands were always dirty, her eyes glazed with that same unsettling calm. Sometimes, I'd find her sitting in the dirt, tears streaming down her face, whispering apologies to the buried things. It wasn't long before the neighborhood started noticing. The garden withered, flowers dying in strange patterns. Birds stopped singing near our house. Even the stray cats stayed away. One night, I stayed out back, hidden in the shadows, watching her work. She dug another hole, her movements slow and deliberate. Then she paused and looked directly at me. "You can't save them," she said softly. "They belong here now." Her words struck me harder than any slap. What was she talking about? What did these things belong to? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the hands in my dreams, reaching for release. I felt as if the earth itself was watching, waiting. The next morning, the ground was disturbed again. A new grave freshly dug. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a deep, gnawing fear that had nothing to do with the dirt or the things buried beneath. It was about what those things represented. Our memories, our past, our family. Slowly being swallowed, piece by piece, by something that fed on loss and silence. She was burying more than objects. She was burying us. The backyard was quiet again, but the silence was deafening. Each hole a secret, each buried thing a missing part of our lives. And still she dug.